We're not taught how to think about our thinking. The one sacred rule of Lego
Yeah.
is you can never use glue. Who you surround yourself with. How do you bring in people who can productively disagree with you? And so integrative thinking is again a mindset and a set of tools that are about saying, how do I leverage the tension of those opposing ideas, profit versus purpose? The best CEOs in my experience are those who recognize that their company exists to serve real people. Most of the decisions that I make on a day-to-day basis in my work are made collaboratively.
IDEO invent design thinking or just pioneered it?
I think helped to popularize it. I think
Helped pop-
there are many parents of design thinking, and IDEO would be one.
Sure.
But I think we played a significant role in helping to bring it into a broader awareness in the world.
What is design thinking?
There are several different definitions, but as IDEO defined it, design thinking is the ability to bring a designer's mindset and tools to tackle whatever challenge you are facing. So, broadly speaking, that means starting by thinking about the user for whom you are trying to solve a problem and their needs.
Sure.
It means diverging to multiple ways of potentially solving that problem rather than quickly seeking the single right answer. It means building, prototyping, testing, and learning, and then experimenting your way into the world. When Tim Brown wrote an article about design thinking in Harvard Business Review, he really did use this definition of design thinking as being about the mindsets and tools of design, and also about the ability to bring three lenses: desirability, what do users want and need; feasibility, what can the technology do; and viability, what can make organizational or business sense. So there are other definitions out there in the world, and different people might tell you different things, but that tends to be how we think about it at IDEO.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it covers all the right bases. I think when I'm put on the spot and I have to answer that question, I usually just shut down and say empathy.
That's
'Cause
not bad. I mean, it's a
yeah.
good shorthand. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about you.
Mhm.
You started your career as a copywriter and, in your words, wanted a seat at the table. And so that led to a 15-year journey at business school and ultimately IDEO. I'm assuming it was more complicated than that.
The general gist of it, absolutely. That's the flow. My undergrad is in the liberal arts. I have an English literature and history degree. And I then desperately on graduation tried to figure out who might hire me to do something. And that took a minute, but I eventually figured out I could write. And so I became a copywriter and an editor and had a few rounds of roles like that. Yeah, that was the beginning.
What kind of writing were you doing at that time?
So I started at a not-for-profit healthcare charity, and I was writing and editing for their membership magazine, and then their academic journal. So I learned a lot about diabetes because that's what it was all about. And then I went to work for Sears Canada, the Canadian branch of what was Sears.
So you were copywriting for a while, and how was that? Years before you decided I want to go to business school, or what was that like?
Yeah, it was probably several years. But the thing that inspired me to go to business school is that my role was outsourced. We were sent to work at a studio. That was not an environment I enjoyed. It wasn't a shift I was happy about.
Sure.
I had had that decision made for me. I thought it was a bad decision, but nobody had asked my opinion about that. And I realized I just didn't have the credibility or the language to be in the room where that decision was being made, where I could have influence to help make better choices, better decisions. And the people who were in that room seemed to have a set of credentials around a business degree or an MBA. So I decided that I would go get an MBA. My intention was go back into the world of business. I thought I might get a job at Procter and Gamble or a big retailer or something like that. But I met the person who was then dean of the Rotman School of Management, where I went, is a man named Roger Martin. And he asked me to stay and work with him for a year when I graduated, taking some of the theories and thinking that he was doing and helping translate it and make it teachable. And so I decided I could do that for a year. What's a year? And I stayed for almost 15.
As a professor.
Yeah, so I wasn't officially a professor. You have to have a PhD to be an official professor, but I was an adjunct, and I taught and wrote and worked with Roger in his role as dean.
That's cool. So what are there any key takeaways before we move on to the next phase of life in those 15 years?
I mean, I had the opportunity to learn about design, which is what initially inspired my interest in IDEO, to learn deeply about strategy and decision making. And most of my time was spent on this theory of integrative thinking, the idea of how you navigate what seem like impossible tensions. And I taught that, I wrote about it, and really feel like that was the big theme of those years of my life.
Great segue. Let's talk about your book. I read it. I really liked it. For people who haven't read it, and maybe there's, I think, a good juxtaposition between integrative thinking and design thinking. Can you unpack that a little bit? What is integrative thinking, and how does that compare and contrast?
Sure. Well, thank you for the kind words about the book. I see design and integrative thinking as very complementary disciplines. So we already talked a little bit about what design and design thinking are, the sort of general principles, empathy and user understanding, asking great questions, synthesizing, diverging to many possibilities, testing and learning, all of that. It is a way of tackling complicated, interesting problems of innovation and change. Integrative thinking is another set of tools you can use to help you do that in a particular context. It is most useful in those moments where you're facing a difficult choice and you look at the options and you say, not good enough. Like I actually don't want to choose. Or sometimes actually these are both great answers and I don't want to choose because choosing one would mean giving up the other. And so integrative thinking is again a mindset and a set of tools that are about saying, how do I leverage the tension of those opposing ideas, not to choose, not to narrow, but to create a new possibility, to resolve the tension in a new way that gives me a bit of, I mean, some people say the best of both, or a resolution of the tension that is better than choosing one or the other. And when I joined Rotman, that was the idea Roger Martin was really thinking about. He built a bit of a theory of what this was, and that it was a really successful way of thinking for leaders. And I joined to help him think about how you would teach that, how you would turn it into a process other people who don't naturally think this way might actually be able to emulate and do and use in their day to day. But even more so, I mean, I don't know about you, most of the decisions that I make on a day to day basis in my work are made collaboratively. I rarely get to go into my office, shut the door, make this big decision for the future of the company, and then tell people what to do. And so the other aspect of both design, I would argue, and integrative thinking are about how you engage with others to collaboratively co-create ideas and solutions.
Yes, I would say we make a lot of decisions collaboratively. I think my biggest complaint is maybe I'm too collaborative, because I think there is the leader that is, and you talk about this in Creating Great Choices, your book, sticky beliefs, right? And the leaders who are like, nope, this is the direction, this is what we're doing. I know it because I know, because I'm in charge, because I just know, this is my company. I've never been like that. I'm usually like, who's got the best answer? The places where I've fallen short are many, but that part is usually not my problem of like sticking too hard, I think, to an idea. And so I'm curious, when you talk about like sticky beliefs and creating great choices, like how do you get people to unstick?
It's such an important question because we're not taught how to think about our thinking. There is an emerging desire in education, I think, to teach metacognition, or the ability to think about your own thinking. But I certainly didn't get it when I was in school. I doubt you got it when you were in school, which is about unpacking in a authentic and open way. What do I think and why do I think it? Challenging ourselves to unpack how we got to our conclusions. Very often we're very, very conscious of the answer we've come to, but not all that conscious of how we got there. If you are only surrounded by people who agree with you, it doesn't make you smarter, it just makes you feel more right. And so the key to challenging your existing mental models or the sticky ideas that you hold is how you choose to engage with the world. So one, it's about who you surround yourself with. How do you bring in people who can productively disagree with you? Seeing those people as a gift rather than a threat. They see something you don't see, and that's an opportunity to stress test your thinking. But it's a very careful balance. These aren't my words. This is a woman named Diana McLean Smith who worked with Chris Ardress, the originator of a lot of this work, who said the most powerful stance you can hold is, I have a view worth hearing, but I might be missing something. Which is to say, you should be going into that room saying, actually, I do have a perspective here. It's not perfect, it's not the right answer, but I'm going to share with you my hunches, my hypotheses, even my strong belief, loosely held, to borrow that phrase, and then to demonstrate real, authentic, and genuine curiosity about how others see it differently, what they might challenge in your thinking, or what they understand or bring into the room that you don't. And then together to be able to say, given what you see, given what I see, how do we think about the possibilities here?
It's interesting because sure, that sounds great, but it feels like, and I don't want to get into like politics, right? But just the general idea of this side is right and that side is wrong. And if I entertain the other side, well, now I'm some version of a traitor. And you know what I mean? Like that idea of, there's some ideas I like here. I could be wrong. It feels like we don't run on that sort of thinking. Or do you disagree? Or can we learn how to?
I think we absolutely can learn how to. I think we have to acknowledge that there are very few definitive right answers. The world is incredibly complex. The mental models we build are always simplifications of this incredibly complex world. They always leave things out. We are always missing things. The challenge we have in politics and in work, is often when someone sees the world differently than we do, we don't acknowledge that there are reasonable humans who can see it differently, or acknowledge that our model is just a model. Right. Instead, we think, I am right, they are wrong. And typically, unconsciously, we put them in one of two buckets. We think either this person isn't smart enough to figure out the right answer, so we treat them as really stupid. Or, this is particularly apropos in politics, we think they know the right answer and they are choosing for their own personal benefit to do the wrong thing, which makes them not stupid, but evil.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that we need to, invite Nazis to Thanksgiving dinner. It's not about saying all ideas are equal and that there isn't evil in the world, but it is about creating space to acknowledge that my mental models, my values, my beliefs are mine. Perfectly reasonable people can hold other ones, up to, I would say, the point in which your beliefs start to infringe on my basic humanity. There is a point at which I do tend to stop entertaining some models and some beliefs, but we all have to find our own personal dividing lines there.
What are your thoughts? Like, how can we arm ourselves with, like, can we, like, your general person, is there an integrative thinking hack where you start to feel like you're going down a rabbit hole? You can stop and say, wait a minute, do I believe this?
I mean, I do think that stance of, I have a view worth hearing, but I might be missing something, is a powerful one to bring into conversations with you. Yeah. Curiosity about the other person does not mean you have to agree with them, right? Sure. It is a designer's stance. I want to understand you and your beliefs and where you come from. I don't have to agree with you. I maybe don't even have to like you, but the desire to understand is powerful. And until we get to a place where at least we seek to understand why people believe what they believe and what is driving their choices, it becomes very difficult to have any possibility of shifting what we might desperately want to shift in terms of the uh, what seem like immovable divides in American society. I think there are actually super majorities of Americans who agree on some fairly important principles, and we don't see those enshrined in law
Right.
because we've lost the ability to come together and talk about those things.
Yeah. Back to the business world.
Mm.
How do you see that playing out typically, and how does your work with IDEO, the world of integrative thinking, creative great choices? You are the COO of IDEO. How does that come together, or does it? Is this a side project, and your job at IDEO is different?
Both, and I would say I think that integrative thinking is something that is now part of who I am and that I have as a core pillar of how I solve problems and the work that I do. Again, it's not the tool that you use on every single challenge, but it's a mindset, and you're looking for that opportunity and you are engaging with the world in a particular way. So you encounter a room where people are struggling to overcome a disagreement. How can you engage in that conversation and use some of the tools of integrative thinking to help them break out of that moment of stuckness? And so I do try to do that. I do try to be very conscious of the way in which my positional power can cause people to hear me differently than if I didn't have this role. So very often when a senior leader says something, even if they say it in an exploratory or I wonder if or how might we, to borrow a design phrase, kind of way, people can hear it as directive or as an order because of the power difference. And so how do you bring very, very clear, explicit attention to, hey, I'm sharing this idea as an idea. It is not me saying we've got to do this. I genuinely am curious how others see this differently, because I think that is how we're going to move forward and differentiate that from those moments where sometimes you have to say, I want to be a collaborative leader. I want to bring everyone along, but here's the thing we're going to do. And we're doing it.
Sure.
I don't want to pretend otherwise. I don't want to treat people as if we're going to have this deeply collaborative conversation and their feedback is going to be taken into account and then not do it. I think you have to be really clear with
Fair.
people about which of those situations you're in. Sometimes there are moments in our design work where clients and teams reach a point where they really feel like they wish there was a better answer. There's an either or that they wish they could overcome. And we do sometimes explicitly have an integrative thinking moment where we follow the process and tools to see whether we can generate a better answer. So I try to bring it in explicitly where appropriate, but I also believe it's just part of how I show up, or at least how I try to show up.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's interesting because it's like maybe the opposite of ignorance is bliss, because I assume you watch people get into a disagreement and you're watching it in slow motion.
It is deeply human. It
Yeah.
is deeply human to want to be right, to want to come to closure quickly. It's based on our most core survival techniques.
Right.
Being uncertain, not being in closure burns calories, right? It actually uses up energy. And if you think about us from an evolutionary perspective, we're both predator and prey, but from a prey perspective, you need to conserve your energy for the fact that at some point a very large hungry animal may show up and try to eat you. You need to be able to run away. And so there's very good reasons for why we try to come to early closure and sit in certainty. It feels good, it delivers actual physical rewards. And so we need to build tools and practices around consciously stepping back from the rewards of closure, stepping back from the sense that we are right and they are wrong, and choosing consciously to engage in the consideration of complexity, at least for a while.
Mhm.
In my experience, the very best creative problem solvers have an array of tools. They bring a lot of flexibility about which is the right tool in any moment, but they have a foundational belief that better answers are possible. And that gives them the energy and the momentum to engage in a little longer consideration of possibility than might naturally be the case.
Sure. I mean, it seems like a prerequisite for that is that both sides are coming to the table with somewhat of an open mind if there are two sides, right? Like, do you ever find yourself in the situation where you're talking to a wall? And is there, because we're talking about closure, we're talking about like messy middle spaces, but sometimes you interact with a situation or a person that it's like, it doesn't seem to be moving. Like, right? Does that happen? Or is there tricks for that?
I mean, I don't want to dismiss the possibility of that. It certainly can happen. I think we treat more situations like that than is actually reasonable.
Okay.
So we assume the other person is going to be difficult, and we treat them like they're going to be difficult, and we produce difficult behavior. We assume there's no room for agreement, and so we operate as if there is no room for agreement. And I have found, not universally, of course, some people are just jerks. It does exist. But showing up with the humility to share your view as a perspective, and then genuinely being curious about the other person is profound. Think about the conversations you've had with people where they genuinely wanted to understand something about you. They weren't just waiting for their turn to talk or figuring out what's the next question on my list. They genuinely wanted to engage with you as a person, genuinely wanted to understand and be in community with you. That is an extraordinarily powerful thing. And it is remarkable how often I have seen what seemed like broken relationships or impossible to overcome disagreements shift by how even just one person shows up. And there's actually cognitive science that explains it, which is reciprocity theory. If I am generous or kind to you, your mind makes note of it and wants to reciprocate. Humans are social by design. We are
Sure.
made to be social creatures, again, so we can survive in an unfriendly world. And you will actually feel uncomfortable if you feel you owe me something. So if I am genuinely curious, if I am open, if I am engaging with you authentically, the rational and human response is to respond in kind. Won't happen every time. You might have to try a few times, and there will be some people who just don't want to play. Thank you very much, or
Right.
use your generosity manipulatively. It does happen, but I think in far fewer circumstances than you might imagine.
Well, let's get meta because you said something that like triggered me in a good way. But this is a conversation that I'm having, right? Because this podcast is new.
Mhm.
And the last time I did this was in high school when I was the anchor for the high school news program. And that was 20 something years ago. And it's been a journey. If you ever want to experience deep self loathing, start a podcast and watch yourself over and over again because it's a journey. And this is something I was just talking to Susanna about, who's our head of operations and the best person in the world, keeps me sane. Thank you, Susanna. And I was expressing to her this very problem that you just set up. Instead of being ready to ask the next question, right? But my role that I'm constantly thinking of is I want to make sure you're having a good time. So I don't want to let there be a lull, or I don't want to say the wrong question, or I need to make sure I remember the right question next. And then each guest has like a deep, because we do a little bit of research, right? Like I want to make sure the questions are of value to you. But then that means it's not quite that easy to just say, where are you from? What do you do for a living? So help me. How can I break out of that and make this more like integrative and human when I'm running into that?
One, I think you're putting an extraordinary amount of pressure on yourself. That's a lot for one person to hold all at once.
Yeah.
Um, I think that when we put a label on things, it makes it much harder for us. So I often find this. I do a lot of strategy work, and I find that once I say strategy, people are like, okay, I'm going to use business buzzwords. I'm going to show up in a particular way, and they just stop being able to understand how to speak about choices in a way other human beings might understand. A backbone of where you want the conversation to go,
Mm-hmm.
and then genuine in the moment engagement with the other people feels to me like sweet spot between totally structured and me needing to be accountable for your experience and I don't know, I'll just see what happens, right? Neither of those are great options. These conversations are tennis matches. We want to be in it together.
Sure.
And it's a shared space. We're jointly responsible for where we go and what this conversation is. So I would take a little of the pressure off yourself, honestly.
You sound like my therapist. Because really all I want out of this is, can we educate and entertain? Can this be fun to listen to? Did anyone learn anything? And did you have a good time? Do you feel like you got what you wanted out of it? You know?
I mean, my bet is if you learned something and you had fun, other people will too. That's my bet.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And so, like, what is it like at IDEO? Because in my mind, it's like IDEO. You know, like what are you doing there on a daily basis?
I mean, every day is a little bit different. I think that we are most often in a project room with a group of different kinds of designers, and we might be tackling a problem that is. A few years ago, we were asked to help design the interior for the next supersonic jet. So we didn't have to do the aerospace engineering of that, but what would the experience inside be? Or we might be asked to work on the strategy for a company. What is their future and how might they create a different future for themselves than they have today? Or we might be asked to think about helping an organization build its own creative capabilities to learn and grow and bring more design tools and methods and mindsets into their own organization. And so depending on the challenge, you'll have a different set of people in the room with you. You might be out in the field doing design research and seeking inspiration from unexpected places, or spending the day following someone around while they're shopping with permission. That's important.
Sure.
But following them around.
Yeah.
You might be in a room, yes, filled, messy with sticky notes, trying to make sense of what you learned and find opportunities and turn those into ideas, and leveraging these brilliant physical designers that we have who can then turn those ideas into something real. You might be in the client room, sharing with them what you've learned and inviting them to help make it better. All of those things might be happening on any given day.
Okay. And is it a linear process? I'm guessing not. It's client by client and pick what you need.
So neither linear nor prescriptive. So
Okay.
every project is just a little bit different. It has those touchstones of user needs, divergence and imagination, building, designing, testing. Those are always part of what we do. But you can think of it as quite a looping process. So the very best designs would start with very early sketches of not very good ideas right away at the beginning of the design process. And
Okay.
then you go out and you get feedback on those and you learn the way in which they're wrong. You know they're wrong, but you don't know how. They're very low resolution. They're very low fidelity, and you then can go back and redesign, throw some away, make some better, add new. And so the very best design happens in this very iterative, looping way where you are gradually getting higher fidelity, richer, more confident in your thinking. And that's really for me what design is. It's a movement from deep uncertainty to ever more confidence in the
Sure.
ideas, in the direction. Never to certainty, because I think certainty is false almost always, but enough confidence to move forward, enough confidence to make the choice and take the leap.
Can we unpack that? Certainty is false almost always, because I feel that way too, but I feel like there's a lot of people who don't feel that way.
I
Like,
mean, we wish for certainty, but anytime you're talking about the future,
right.
anytime you're talking about something that hasn't been done before, the only things you can be even remotely certain about are things that happened in the past. And even then, you have to acknowledge that there's a lot of interpretation about what they mean.
Right.
And there's still people who aren't certain about that. Like I feel pretty confident that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, but not everyone believes that to be true. I feel pretty confident it happened.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about the future, a new design, a new strategy, a new choice that you're making, you can't be certain. The
Right.
future is unknowable. You can test and build confidence and have logic about why you believe it is more rather than less likely to be successful. But
Sure.
anyone who can tell you that the past can make you certain about the future is either naive or disingenuous. They're almost certainly selling you something.
My favorite part of your book was the part about the Lego movie
Hmm.
because I love that movie. And when I was watching it, I was like, how did Lego let this happen? Let alone the Barbie movie. It was like, how did Mattel allow
Mm-hmm.
this to happen? Like, whether you like it or don't like it, like, ballsy move, Mattel, you know? And I would say Lego paved the way for that. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I think the answer to how did Mattel let this happen is, as you said, that the Lego movie demonstrated the possibility.
Right.
So the origin of the Lego movie goes back quite before Lord and Miller showed up and said, let's make a movie. Lego makes one thing, little plastic bricks that are joyful unless you step on them in the middle of the night.
Sure.
And for many years, they had a stream of revenue that came from entertainment properties that were adopting and being associated with the Lego brand. So, an entertainment company would say, we would like to make a video game using your minifigs, and it's going to be a video game that is Lego, Indiana Jones, and The Last Crusade,
Sure.
and you'll get a royalty from that. And people loved it. It was actually a really great stream of revenue for them. And so before long, they start to say, well, what if we didn't just get a little royalty? What if we owned the whole thing? Maybe we could do some of our own entertainment. We will make our own movies. And they did. They made a movie called The Adventure of Clutch Powers.
Okay.
And it's real bad. It's they would tell you it is earnest and deeply reverential to the brand and like really bad from a storytelling and filmmaking experience perspective
Okay.
with deeply talented people working on it. So when the opportunity comes back to Lego and there is an outside entity saying we'd like to make a movie about Lego, not using Lego figures, but about Lego, what do you think? There were a ton of people inside Lego saying this is a really bad idea because there's a really difficult choice at the heart of this that's around intellectual property. So all Lego really has is the value of its brand, that it stands for something that children love, that have loved for 100 years, and they don't want to do anything to tarnish that brand. So there is a protective dimension, a mindset that says don't do anything that could potentially damage this brand, hurt our company, hurt our customers.
Right.
And then you have this other thing that is about what it takes to make a great movie. And there is an understanding, I think, that you need some freedom and the room to play and be a little irreverent and have creative control. And what they understood, Jorgen Vignestrup, who is the CEO at the time, understood is if Lego insisted on creative control of a Lego movie, the result was going to be mediocre. There was just no great filmmaker who would agree to do that. The result of that legalistic back and forth would water down anything interesting or fun or great about the content. And so they understood that if they wanted there to be a great Lego movie, they would have to give creative control to the people making that movie. And so when Jorgen talks about this moment in history, he said, we agreed to give them total creative control under one condition. Before they wrote anything, before they recorded anything, before they did anything with this movie, they needed to come and spend meaningful time, not with the executives of Lego and not with the board, but with the people to whom Lego matters the most, little kids. They needed to come and play with Lego, with little kids, and understand what Lego means to them. And their belief was that the filmmakers would learn what is true and important and essential about the Lego brand, and that would be important to the storytelling. But even more so, they would understand how much it means to these children and kind of fall in love with these kids and take on their own sense of responsibility for not doing anything that would damage these kids' love of and engagement with this magical thing that's so important to them. And that, of course, turned out to be the case. The Lego movie is funny and just irreverent enough, but still joyful and wonderful about what it is that building ethos of Lego that we love. And in the interviews, not only did the filmmakers talk to kids, they also talked to a group I didn't know up to then existed, which is a massive community of adult Lego superfans.
Right.
People who build Lego all their lives and they are obsessed with it, and they go to conventions and it's this whole thing. And what they learn from talking to the adults is that there's one sacred rule of Lego, and the movie's been out for 10 years, so this is a spoiler, but come on. The one sacred rule of Lego is you can never use glue.
Right.
And that becomes a critical and important plot point in the movie.
The most mind-blowing part, too, because when it was like, wait, we're existing in parallel universes that are interacting with each other through this, like, glue, the dad is the bad guy. Like, you kind of know he is, but then they brought it there, actually, to that conclusion. It made me really happy. The other thing that I liked about your book specifically, because it sets that problem up, whereas Lego had a new CEO that was trying to save money by getting rid of some of the colors, and he got rid of dark gray and the Lego. And I don't want to give away too much of your book because absolutely you should buy and read this book. But the reason I want to bring it up is because this is something I think about where that was probably a failure in that CEO's eyes, right? Like he took away this thing that outraged their core community. And if I'm butchering the story, please retell it better. But the CEO's says we got to cut some colors, we got to save money. He takes away something that he thinks is redundant, which is dark gray. And it turns out the Lego enthusiast community uses that for shading, and they're pissed. And the CEO learns this lesson of like, we got to talk to the people before we make these decisions, right? And that failure probably set up this amazing win, which was that approach, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Jurgen is one of the great CEOs of his generation. He's incredibly smart, creative gentleman, and he was the first non-family member to run Lego, and so he was up against this incredible culture that was wary appropriately of this outsider coming in. I think they sort of had a mental model that he was like this McKinsey suit who was going to come in and try to make Lego something it wasn't. And I think, gets back to design. He very quickly learned how deeply important engaging directly with real human beings, not with a spreadsheet that tells you about your segments, but actually directly with a real person, the power of that and what it can teach you about what they care about, who they are, their values, their needs. That, when paired with the deep quantitative analysis that you can get, is really, really helpful in how you lead, how you decide. But the best CEOs in my experience are those who recognize that their company exists to serve real people and who make time, intentional, dedicated, specific time, no matter how busy their day might be, to spend time with actual consumers.
It makes me want to reintegrate in person because a lot of what we do is digital, right? Mm-hmm. We can see the data. We know what to do. We know how to target market. And it's easy to fall back on that. And it makes me want to be like, we got to do some in-person human research again, like the good old days.
There's a really famous, every company has its founding stories that get told and told and told. And one of the stories you're told when you join IDEO is about design research and its power. And a design researcher who was in a woman's home talking to her about how it was a health pharmaceutical challenge. It was about essentially it was the design of pill bottles. if you can imagine.
Okay.
And the researcher says, do you ever have any trouble getting into your pills? Because this was an older woman. She was clearly arthritic. They could see that by being in the room with her.
Yeah.
And she said, no, no problem. I'm no problem opening my pill bottles at all. And the researcher sees this dissonance, being able to be in this woman's home and see that she has physical limitations, but she's saying, no, it's no problem at all. And so he's able to say, well, can you just show me how you do that? And she is this lovely, grandmotherly, I want to say Italian woman. And she takes them into her kitchen where she has a meat slicer. And she shows that she puts the pill bottle in and slices the lid of the cap off so she can get in.
It's a good idea. Innovative.
She truly had no problem getting into the bottle if she had hacked a powerful solution.
Right.
But it is the power of in-personness and curiosity to see, to observe, to understand, and then to ask the next question and the next question. You can leverage technology in some ways to help you access people that would be hard to access otherwise. And so for me, it's a both and. You need to find the times and places and ways where you can be in person and learn deeply, but also acknowledge there will be some people you will never get to be able to access or understand if you rely totally on in-personness.
Sure.
And so how do you leverage the really great advances in technology that let us be a little more present virtually, and so do both?
Yeah. This podcast is about business and consciousness, right? That's one and the same, those two different statements. So how do you choose? Like, do you ever walk away? You're like, no, the money's nice, but this problem isn't worth solving. Or how do we as entrepreneur and business folk who, you get an idea and it's the best idea ever and you want to make it, but does that thing need to be made? Like, how do you make those choices?
I mean, you have to do so without ascribing too much value judgment. What is a problem worth solving to me, maybe not to you, and vice versa. We tend to think of problems worth solving as being a pretty big tent of human, open, and optimistic, right? That there is some thing we're trying to create that might move us forward or make us better or create new value in the world. Those are the kinds of problems we treat as worth solving.
Sure.
Other companies may have a different definition. I think the places I get most excited are where it's not about just one thing. So I am a huge believer that business can be a force for good.
Okay.
We don't always, and in fact, not enough do we live up to that.
Right.
And that is because we've accepted this mental model that the purpose of business is to maximize the short-term return to shareholders. And yes, shareholders matter. We need to deliver a fair and reasonable return to them, but in balance with the other things that matter,
right,
with creating value for the people who work for us and creating value for our world, and making sure that we are considering questions of climate and social progress, and really thinking about the long-term value of what it is that we're creating. And so for me, there's a reframe of how do we engage in these conversations about profit versus purpose, and say they naturally and appropriately need to be in balance with one another. It's not one or the other. It shouldn't be one or the other.
right.
To be thriving, to be a great entity and an organization people want to work for and be a patron of, it's about finding that magical elixir of being purpose-driven and profitable in the right mix.
Jennifer, this was really fun. Thank you for the therapy session midway also, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun for me as well. Anytime.
Thanks so much.